Those who oppose the army takeover in Myanmar gather in their thousands a day after their protests turned deadly in the city of Mandalay. That bloodshed has prompted the UN to condemn the heavy-handedness of the ruling generals. We'll be speaking to our international affairs editor Philip Turle very shortly. Exactly a year after Israel registered its first case of COVID-19, the latest batch of restrictions are being eased this Sunday. With nearly half the population now vaccinated, the Health Ministry has announced that 2 doses of the Pfizer drug can do wonders. Also coming up this hour, chunks of aircraft rain down from the skies onto one community in Colorado. A United Airlines flight is forced to return to the runway in Denver after suffering engine failure. Hello and welcome back to the France 24 newsroom. Tensions linger in Myanmar a day after the deadliest protest to date since the military snatched the reins of power earlier this month. Tens of thousands have assembled in towns and cities nationwide, with pots and pans being used to drum for democracy and with signs being held aloft calling for the release of the detained leader Aung San Suu Kyi. After 2 people died and 30 others were wounded in Mandalay on Saturday, the UN has now condemned the use of force, with mourners also set to pay their final respects to the 20-year-old demonstrator who died on Friday after being shot in the head last week. Let's listen first, though, to what some of those taking part in today's rally in Yangon have been saying.
လူတွေကိုမနေ့ကမန္တလေးမှာလူတွေတေဆုံးမှုဖြစ်သွားတယ်။တေဆုံးမှုဖြစ်တယ်ဆိုတာဒါကကျွန်တော်တို့ကငြိမ်းချမ်းစွာဆန္ဒထုတ်ဖော်တယ်။ငြိမ်းချမ်းစွာဆန္ဒထုတ်ဖော်တယ်။အကြမ်းမဖက်ပဲနေတဲ့ဟာကိုကျွန်တော်တို့ပေါ့နော်ဒီအကြမ်းဖက်တဲ့လူတွေကိုဒုက္ခရောက်အောင်လုပ်တယ်တေဆုံးအောင်လုပ်ပြီးပေါ့။ဒါကဘာလုပ်တာလဲဆိုတော့ဆက်ရနာရှင်ဆိုရကျွန်တော်တို့ပြည်သူတွေလမ်းပေါ်ထွက်ပြီးဆန္ဒပြတဲ့ကိစ္စကိုသူတို့ဘက်ကရပ်တန့်စေချင်တဲ့အတွက်ကျွန်တော်တို့ကိုဒါပြင်းပြင်းထန်ထန်နှိပ်ကွပ်ပြရတဲ့အတွက်ဖြစ်တယ်။အဲ့ဒီအတွက်ကြောင့်ကျွန်တော်တို့ပြည်သူတွေအနေနဲ့သူတို့ဘက်ကသူတို့မတရားနှိပ်စက်တဲ့အပေါ်မှာလက်မခံမင်းနဲ့ကျွန်တော်တို့ပူပေါင်းပြီးရှေ့ဆက်ပြီးတော့တိုက်ပွဲဝင်ကြရမယ်ကျွန်တော်တို့ကသူတို့ဒီနေ့တယောက်တတ်တယ်ဆိုရင်ကျွန်တော်တို့ကလူတထောင်ပို့တိုးတယ်ဆန္ဒပြမှုကိုပို့တိုးတယ်ကျွန်တော်တို့ကတော့ရက်တက်မှာတော့မဟုတ်ဘူးဘာလို့မရက်တက်လဲဆိုတော့ကျွန်တော်တို့လိုချင်တဲ့ကျွန်တော်တို့ရဲ့လိုချင်တဲ့ဒီမိုကရေစီကိုကျွန်တော်တို့ကပါတိုင်းကိုဇွဲမလျှော့ဘဲနဲ့ကျွန်တော်ဆက်သွားမယ်ဒါကြောင့်မလို့ကျွန်တော်နိုင်ငံတကာကိုပြောပြချင်ပါတယ်ထိရောက်တဲ့ sanction အရေးယူမှုတာမကဘဲနဲ့ပုံမထိရောက်တဲ့ပြင်းပြထန်တဲ့အရေးယူမှုတွေအများဆုံးလုပ်ပေးပါလို့ကျွန်တော်တောင်းဆိုချင်တယ်
Well, for more, as the streets fill up with demonstrators once again this Sunday and as fears linger that a huge army crackdown could be imminent, we can bring in France 24's Philip Turle. Philip, just what are the stakes facing the protesters on one side and the Myanmar military on the other?
Well, Thomas, the military are having to deal with what is turning out to be a national resistance movement, a civil disobedience movement against the coup. That is really their immediate challenge. Now, the question that everybody is asking is, can they do this without killing large numbers of protesters, which they've always done in the past? For the moment, what the military is appearing to do is to use a tactic of intimidation by arresting people, by taking them away, by closing down the internet during the night, by switching off the power, by trying their very hardest to stop the protest movement from gathering more momentum. That has not seemed to be working at the moment. But the bottom line is that the junta does need a political path back to legitimacy. It's given itself a year to fix the problem of the National League of Democracy, that's the party of Aung San Suu Kyi, its popularity at the ballot box, to try to hold elections to bring the country back to democracy. That's what they said when they launched the coup 3 weeks ago. But the problem is that if there are elections in Myanmar, they are going to leave any government which is formed afterwards with practically no legitimacy at all, because it will be deemed as being a military government in soft gloves, if you like, but will still be backed by the military. And the fear is that if there are elections, the military will not let another party, which is independent of the military, take power. So the alternative to all of this, of course, is many more years of military rule and the total exclusion of power of anybody like Aung San Suu Kyi, whom the military are really hoping will disappear off the scene. She's already 75 years old. She's lost credibility on the international front, and they're hoping that support for her will wane in the weeks to come, and they won't have to impose this military crackdown in the bloodthirsty way they've always done in the past.
Now, Philip, the United States has already imposed sanctions, and there are growing calls for sanctions from the EU and from the UN. But these don't appear to have had any effect to date on the military, do they?
No, they don't, for the simple reason that the international opinion is split on what to do with Myanmar. Even the United Nations Security Council of High Permanent Members are split over their response to the situation in Myanmar, with China and Russia supporting the military and the other countries, notably Britain, France and the United States, throwing their weight behind the protesters in Myanmar. But it's so split they haven't even been able to issue a statement by the UN Security Council condemning the coup. That's basically because China and Russia support the military leaders. They both, as far as Russia is concerned, signed military deals with the military in Myanmar, and China is seen more to support what the military is doing. That's to say, it is more in favor of authoritarianism more than democracy, which it sees as more effective. And that's why there are fears that US sanctions, if they are stepped up, will push Myanmar further into the arms of China than to the West.
Philip Turl, thank you very much. To the Castle Hill Medical Centre in Sydney now, where 84-year-old Jane Malisiak has become the first Australian to be inoculated against the coronavirus. The country's vaccination programme is set to really get going this Monday, but a small group, including Prime Minister Scott Morrison, have already had their jabs. But nearly 22% of the Australian population say that they are unlikely to get a shot, with thousands of anti-vaccine protesters marching through several cities on Saturday. Israel has announced, meanwhile, that the Pfizer-BioNTech drug is massively effective. The risk of illness from COVID-19 has tumbled 95.8% in those who've had both jabs of that drug. The government has now announced a major lifting of restrictions, with stores, museums and schools reopening this Sunday. Nadia Massi tells us more.
In Israel, it's now the turn of the teenagers. Anyone over 16 can now get a coronavirus jab, cementing the country's status as the world's fastest inoculator against COVID-19. 4.25 million people have now received at least one dose of the vaccine. That's nearly half of Israel's population. Among the over 60s, that figure rises to 80%. And in yet more good news for Israel, studies show the brand of vaccine being used is highly effective. One dose of the Pfizer-BioNTech jab provides 85% protection against infection, and 2 doses offers a whopping 95%.
Compared with unvaccinated, vaccine was effective in 85% in preventing clinical COVID or symptomatic COVID. That means our vaccinated workers were protected starting the 3rd week after the first dose, with an excellent protection against symptomatic COVID.
So how did Israel succeed in leading the global vaccination race? The short answer is the government bought up a lot of vaccine stock and paid above market price. Israel reportedly paid about €23 per single dose, compared with €10 each by the EU. The plan now is to roll out what Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has called green passports, a document allowing vaccinated Israelis to go to restaurants, cinemas and even travel abroad. But his government has come under criticism for only recently allowing vaccines to enter the Gaza Strip. The first shipment of the Russian Sputnik V vaccine arrived in the territory on Wednesday.
Here in France, the number of new coronavirus infections is creeping up again. The 7-day moving average of new cases has increased by 163 to over 19,000 after falling nearly continuously in the first half of the month. Now, with new variants pushing up the caseload here in France and elsewhere, scientists are busy looking for a universal vaccine. Fraser Jackson and our colleagues at France 2 Television explain.
This lab in the French city of Lyon is looking for the silver bullet that could help end the COVID-19 pandemic.
Here we're working on a universal vaccine against the different strains of the virus.
They believe they found the right formula. Now they're just looking for the right dose. The biotech company has been working on a universal flu jab since 2013. Now they're putting everything they've learned into the fight against the coronavirus.
Most current projects focus on the spike proteins of the coronavirus, but as those spikes mutate, you have to change the vaccine. What we're doing targets what's inside the virus, meaning that even if the outside changes, the vaccine doesn't.
All being well, clinical trials could start at the end of 2021. As different variants pop up, scientists the world over are on the hunt for the magical formula that will cover all mutations. But is a universal vaccine even a possibility? This researcher isn't so sure.
I think the term universal vaccine is a bit of a marketing ploy. What will probably come to the market won't be a universal vaccine, but a vaccine that protects against multiple strains. That's already better than the jabs that are on the market at the moment, but not something I would call a universal vaccine.
As research into new vaccines continues, scientists remain united on one thing. People should still take the vaccines already available on the market.
To Africa now, and polling is underway across Niger this hour. 7.4 of the country's 22 million strong population are eligible to have their say in this Sunday's runoff presidential vote. The ballot pits the outgoing president's chosen successor, Mohamed Bazoum, against Mahaman Ousmane, who's running for the fifth time since he was ousted back in 1996. Next, if you find debris, please don't touch it or move it. That was the message from police to the residents of Broomfield, Colorado, after fragments of a Boeing passenger jet fell to the ground. United Airlines says its flight suffered engine failure, prompting the pilot to make a mayday call to air traffic control. As Caris Garland explains, an investigation has now been opened.
It's not something these residents of a Denver suburb expected to find in their front yard. Debris from a United Airlines aircraft rained down onto streets, football pitches and homes in the US city after the plane experienced an engine failure shortly after takeoff.
We heard this big bang and we just kind of looked at each other and didn't think much of it. Next thing you know, we heard another big bang and looked out our front window right as the engine cowl rolled into the tree. So it landed right straight up and down in the bed of my truck.
The United 328 Heavy Mayday aircraft just experienced an engine failure, needed to turn immediately.
The Boeing 777-200 had 241 people on board and was heading to Hawaii when the right engine failed. This video appears to show the plane leaving behind a cloud of black smoke in the sky. It was able to turn back and land safely, with no reports of injuries either on board or on the ground.
We started and everything started well, and then all of a sudden it was just this big, you could just feel it like boom, and you could hear it, and we started shaking.
The National Transportation Safety Board has opened an investigation to determine the cause of the incident, with which Boeing said its technical advisors would assist.
And finally, Lady and the Tramp, Lassie, Beethoven and Garfield are all well-known films with a pet in the leading role. But in the Brazilian city of Rio, this mix of movies and animals has been turned on its head. The cinema there has held a special screening of Tom and Jerry, allowing people and their pets to come and watch the cartoon. This event has also been a golden opportunity for those cinema buffs who don't have an animal to adopt one. It's one of many film screenings planned in Brazil to place abandoned animals who are in need of a roof over their heads with a family. And that brings you up to date once again. Do stay with us here on France 24.